Nobody talks enough about the grief that can come with awakening. People often think that, awakening feels euphoric all the time, but sometimes awakening feels like mourning in an entire identity. And so, I think about and reflect about all the aspects of myself, especially when after going through a divorce, that was, my biggest catalyst for me. I had already, been, I would say, partially awake, but I feel like this was the sudden like catalyst moment, like huge turning point in my life. And so this created, what may seem like, grief at the time, because grief is important also as an important process, to be able to release more of the outdated versions. And so it serves as an alchemical stage in our life.
Beloved heart, before we begin, I have a special gift for you. If you've been feeling the intensity of Earth's rising plasma light codes and want to stay centered in your body and heart and energy field, I've created a free light language quantum grounding activation just for you. This transmission will help you stabilize, integrate, and align with the new frequencies flowing onto the planet. Simply join my mailing list. See the link that's in the show notes to receive instant access. Let's ground into the light together.
This is the transfiguration of the new you. Hello, beloved. Welcome back to my podcast, Ascended Earth. I'm Monica Bermudez. I'm your host. Let's talk about in this episode about 5D consciousness and what nobody's really talking about. Hardly anyone's talking about this in regards to 5D consciousness. So there are so many conversations online right now about 5D consciousness, the ascension, the awakening, the timeline shifts, and a lot of the symptoms, galactic upgrades, new Earth energy. But there are certain parts of this journey that almost nobody speaks honestly about, which is something that I want to share with you. And it's nothing to do with anything being hidden, but because some experiences can only truly be understood once you begin living through them. So when you start to experience the things for yourself, you will know for certainty, what it is like to be in that field of energy. So, and I feel this conversation is important because many of you are currently moving through profound energetic changes internally, while externally your life may look completely uncertain. So, we just had a really powerful new moon, supermoon in Taurus this past weekend. And I have to say, this felt very much like a recalibration of a reset, for some quantum new beginnings. I still feel that we're somewhat still in that bubble because it was a supermoon, so it has a much stronger effect on us. So just curious who else was feeling the energy of it for, over the weekend. So in regards to the 5D consciousness, there's times that, we may feel like disconnected from who, we used to be. And sometimes you may feel more sensitive than ever. You may feel like certain people no longer understand you. You may feel exhausted, emotional, detached from old goals, or suddenly uninterested in the things that once consumed your energy. And what I want you to understand is this. Sometimes the discomfort is not a sign that you are, doing anything wrong or that anything is a failure. But sometimes it's a sign that an old identity or an outdated version of yourself can no longer carry your soul forward or is no longer moving in that frequency resonance, that pulsating vibrational energy of, the new form that is evolving. So, this is one of the hidden realities of awakening into higher consciousness because 5D consciousness is not just about love and light. It's not about really bypassing reality. It's not about pretending darkness does not exist or the shadow. True awakening requires radical discernment. So nobody talks enough about that, about the fact that there is a bit of grief when it comes to releasing, letting go, or just moving on into a whole new version and moving out of an outdated version in how we identify ourselves to certain aspects in our life that we may have that may have dissolved or in a loss, I would say, because we're used to saying the word loss. So, one of the biggest misconceptions about 5D consciousness is the belief that ascending means escaping human experience. But in truth, higher consciousness often makes you aware of energy and, not less of anything. And so to be human actually is the greatest gift that we can have because we carry so much potential within ourselves, in our DNA. There's still so much in our DNA that is unlocking, that is, coming in through layers, and it's not going to come in all at once because it would be overwhelming. It would be too much for the nervous system to take on. Now, some people may, take on more, because that's probably part of their role in their lifetime to do that. So it's not to discredit anyone for going, in much deeper layers of, of their DNA upgrade, I would say. So you begin sensing, intentions more deeply. At this point, you begin recognizing the distortions faster. So you're tuning in to deeper frequencies and becoming in more in that sensitivity. So you become essentially like a stronger tuning fork. You begin noticing where people are disconnected from their own truth, and you begin seeing where you once abandoned yourself in order to keep peace and keeping that people pleasing type of thing. And that can feel incredibly lonely at first because as consciousness expands, your tolerance for misalignment decreases. You stop being able to force yourself into spaces that drain your spirit. You stop pretending certain dynamics feel healthy when internally you know they don't. You stop performing old versions of yourself just to make others comfortable. And honestly, the transition phase can feel brutal. Nobody talks enough about the grief that can come with awakening. People often think that, awakening feels euphoric all the time, but sometimes awakening feels like mourning in an entire identity. And so, I think about and reflect about all the aspects of myself, especially when after going through a divorce, that was, my biggest catalyst for me. I had already, been, I would say, partially awake, but I feel like this was the sudden like catalyst moment, like huge turning point in my life. And so this created, what may seem like, grief at the time, because grief is important also as an important process, to be able to release more of the outdated versions. And so it serves as an alchemical stage in our life. And so that is where, things start to build up into this greater breakthrough. So yeah, so then, awakening can feel like that mourning of an entire, version of self that has dissolved, that has, been disappearing or just removing itself. For instance, like we may identify ourselves with in within a relationship, within, and it could be any type of relationship, friendship, could be romantic, um, partner, business partner, um, and and also relation to jobs because I know there's been like huge amount of job loss, like all of a sudden, right? They came out of nowhere. And so that creates a shock wave, it creates a grief, it creates, a whole mourning state, and understandably so. Don't ignore what is coming up, and that is the point of that. So you begin to realize, realizing that the old version of you cannot return. And so that is, part of that mourning and that grief. So there is that death, process. Death is really the transition, but doesn't mean that it's pretty or, fun or anything like that. But the old coping mechanisms, no longer work, and the old relationships may shift. Old ambitions may dissolve, and old masks may become exhausting to wear. So there's an aspect that can no longer pretend, but there's more of this craving for this authenticity within your soul, and you will feel it the most strongest in your heart. So during this process, many people feel suspended between timelines, not fully connected to the old reality, but not fully stabilized in the new one yet either. So this is where, many people, panic because the ego wants certainty and control, and the ego wants an immediate answer. Um, so, the ego wants to know, where is this leading? When will everything make sense? And when will I feel normal again? But, waking often asks you to walk through uncertainty before clarity arrives. And this is where trust becomes spiritual mastery, because the trust is within your own heart of knowingness, or the heart of wisdom. And so this is where you start to build your tools within yourself, the part of your own mastery of learning. And it's not, that it is a blind trust in any way, or it's more like a discerning trust. And there is a difference between these two. Because another thing nobody talks about in the spiritual community is how important discernment truly is. Not every message is truth, and not every spiritual teacher is aligned. Not every energetic experience is divine guidance, and not every comfortable feeling means you are under attack spiritually either. Sometimes exhaustion is simply just exhaustion, and sometimes your body just needs rest, and sometimes your nervous system is overwhelmed from overstimulation and emotional processing, collective energy, and constant energetic input. So, all of this, when it comes to emotional processing, especially, when it comes to grief and mourning, there is an aspect of, rest that is needed, where you may feel extreme exhaustion. So, and sometimes healing looks incredibly ordinary, like hydration, drinking plenty of water, and staying in your own silence for a moment of reflection, spending time in nature, um, boundaries, how many times can we say no to something in a healthy way? Um, and also getting sleep and just being still and doing certain meditational rhythms. That could be yoga as well, and doing breath work. Not every moment needs, decoding, and not every synchronicity is a cosmic emergency. So, one of the signs of maturity, spirituality, is learning when to pause interpretation and simply become present in the moment of right now, and really tune in to your inner deepest guidance within your own heart. Because true 5D consciousness is not about obsession, it's really about the coherence. It's it is alignment, it is inner clarity, it is learning how to remain heart-centered without losing that discernment. That balance matters deeply right now, especially because many people are waking up rapidly, and rapid awakening can create spiritual inflation. So people begin believing they are above others. So there is that spiritual ego type of thing. So those are the things to really monitor and watch out, keep yourself in balance. And that balance is through the heart, through the authenticity of your own heart. So, a lot of times people may think they're incapable of making mistakes, but, authentic higher consciousness creates humility, I would say. It's not about superiority or feeling like anyone's more evolved than anybody else either. So the more aware you become, the more compassion you often develop. And that compassion really starts from yourself because you realize you come so far, to reach these stages. And holding that compassion with self also creates this rippling effect that is compassion with others as well, because you start to understand, where they're coming from. So everybody is going to be at their own level. It doesn't mean that they're wrong or that they have failed in any way or that they're less evolved just because they're, in a certain evolutionary stage. And it's not for anybody to judge in any way either. Um, so you just begin to realize, right, that every person is carrying invisible battles and karmic lessons, ancestral wounds, and soul contracts beyond what the surface may reveal. And yet, compassion does not mean self-abandonment. This is another lesson many people must learn during awakening. You can love someone deeply and still recognize they are not aligned on your path anymore. You can forgive someone and still create distance. You can remain heart-centered and still say no. Boundaries are not anti-spiritual. Boundaries are often sacred. And I feel many listeners need to hear this right now because we are moving through a collective shift where many people are releasing identities built around overgiving, rescuing, martyr, performing, and fixing and proving. So the old templates are collapsing, especially for sensitive souls, especially for healers and many galactic beings, and especially for people who spent years abandoning themselves to maintain that connection. And I was one of them for a very long time until I really realized that I needed to polish a lot of things within myself. It hasn't been perfect, and I don't think, any of this is going to be perfect either. A lot of things will go, through the layers and through your own pace and your own rhythm.
Beloved, if you're craving deeper connection, intuitive expansion, and consistent energetic support, join me inside the Frequency Resonance Lounge. This is a monthly Master Heart Circle, moon ceremonies that includes the full and new moon, and a private community for connections. Link is in the show notes.
5D consciousness asks, what happens when you finally choose authenticity over approval? That question changes everything because eventually awakening stops being about concepts, it becomes embodiment. Can you remain aligned when others misunderstand you? Can you remain compassionate without observing everyone's chaos? And can you trust your intuition without needing external validation constantly? So, can you honor your own energy without the guilt? And these are the questions that I ask myself, and I keep asking myself, just to maintain that inner check in and that inner balance. So these are, spiritual initiations in a way, I would say. And one thing I've noticed is that many people currently feel exhausted because they are trying to carry both timelines simultaneously or just being too focused and trying to fix others as well. And part of them knows they are evolving, while another part is terrified to release that familiar, especially if that familiar is releasing certain family members or friends in the circle or feeling that, just getting too attached, to that and not really letting go and being in the flow of divinity and allowing what is unfolding within self as well. So, and this creates an energetic friction internally. So the mind says, hold on, whereas the soul says it's time to move on and evolve. And during these phases, life may temporarily feel confusing. You may suddenly crave solitude. You may feel emotionally raw and may lose interest in things that once defined you. or the things that pleased you, for some time. I sometimes find myself, especially with these new higher frequencies and pulsating, vibrant, pulsating much faster, that there are images of these past memories, but they're coming in like in this, outdated version of self that has been alchemically dissolving, I would say. So it's like this death process. So how, have you seen like how near death experiences when they go through a death, they go through like a life review? Well, that's kind of how it feels, but it feels like in this stage of transition of moving into these different dimensional spaces. Um, that it feels like there is that dissolving or that life review of this outdated version of myself that is, I would say, dying in a way, um, which is transitioning into this new version. And there is, a bit of uncertainty in that, but I'm trusting that flow of where things are going. So, at times I can see why somebody would think that this is like punishment in a way, but it really isn't. There is some recalibration, a reset that is happening as well. And there could be that confusion, space that between the versions of self. So it's almost like I would say like a dark night of the soul, except that, for some people right now, it's moving much faster than it would have like maybe when it was more linear at the time for this linear time, and the old outdated version of Earth as well, because we're also moving into this new Earth vibrational frequency too. So it's a combination of many things. And so right now it's like this rebirth chamber that is occurring. Um, and so just so you know that rebirth can happen in many different stages, many different versions. And there could be something new that comes up, some shockwave of things, and that could rattle the self and go into like a grief, a temporary grief. And in that moment, there is something else that is being shaken out. So it is like an energetic recalibration as well. And so, rebirth rarely feels polished while it's happening. And nature itself teaches us this. Nature is a perfect example because nature is always going through rebirth, It goes through the different cycles and different changes and shifts. And so I feel like we also go through those different cycles as well when it comes to these different layers of awakening. So transformation often requires dissolution first. The caterpillar dissolves before becoming that butterfly, and seeds break open underground before growth becomes visible. Seeds grow in the dark, so consider that as an analogy of the dark night of the soul. In spirituality, many people are in visible transformation cycles right now, which is why can become really dangerous. And I've caught myself many times on this when I find myself comparing myself to others. So this could be a very dangerous path to go. So just be aware of this as well. Because social media often shows, the performance of spirituality and not really the reality of the transformation that is happening. So people post, the activation, few people post about the grief, and people post, the manifestation, and few people post the identity death that preceded it. So there is a version of death that occurred before the manifestation is unfolding or happening, because that's really what it is when it comes to actual physically planting a seed to a plant, right? There is a level of manifestation into the physical reality that is happening, and that is part of that rebirth. But in order to get there, there is a bit of shadow and darkness that is the catalyst for that birthing. So people post, the light, some people do, and few, people speak honestly about the void and about, the how sacred it can be as well. So the void is where realities dissolve themselves and where your soul reconnects with itself. And where that clarity eventually returns. And if you're currently in that in between space, I want you to know this: you do not need to rush your becoming. You do not need to force that clarity or prematurely. You do not need to perform that healing, you do not need to prove your spirituality, but real consciousness is not loud. It's more grounded, it's aware, it's discerning, and it's compassionate in its authenticity. And perhaps one of the deepest truths nobody talks about regarding 5D consciousness is this: the goal is not about escaping humanity, it's not about escaping the shadow, it's not about escaping the darkness. And the goal is bringing higher awareness into the human experience itself. So, learning how to live consciously and speak consciously, love consciously, create consciously, choose consciously. That is the ascension in body, and it's not perfection. It's not a spiritual performance. It's not about bypassing the pain, but becoming more present, more aligned, and more truthful with yourself over time. And there is a level of humility with it. And humility does not mean that it's weak in any way either. So, and honestly, I think many of you listening already know deep down that your life is changing. You can feel it, even if you cannot fully explain yet, what it is. And the old cycles may feel heavier now because your soul no longer wants to repeat them. It wants to evolve and move on into the next phase, into a new chapter, a new version, a new initiation. The old mask may feel unbearable because your spirit wants authenticity, and the old chaos may feel exhausting because your energy is craving peace. And while this transition can feel lonely sometimes, you are not alone in it. So, wherever you are in the journey today, whether you feel clear or uncertain, expansive or exhausted, connected or in between, honor the season you're in, because awakening is not a race, it is a remembering. So, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast for this episode. And if it has resonated for you, please share with someone who may need this message right now. And as always, continue listening to your soul, continue protecting your peace, and continue walking the path of both open heart, but also with that discernment. So, until next time. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to click like, save, and share with others so they can also experience what you just experienced. And stay tuned for some more high vibe episodes. And I'll be connecting with you in the next quantum field. Sending you so much love.